Hello everyone, this is Anita. I apologize for the duration since the last time that I've recorded a video, but I've been struggling with this video a lot for really the last month, or maybe even longer, because I think I made another video before I even tried to tackle this. And I thought it would be a little bit cleaner and a little bit more obvious. And I finally decided to do this video in part because if I do it somewhat well, I think you'll start seeing some of the internal confusion, some of the internal doubts, some of the internal uncertainties that I believe that all transgender people deal with as sort of a natural course of things. And I think this is, if you're not transgender, I think you don't really deal a whole lot with who I refer to. So when you talk about I, you have a real sense. You may have issues about exactly who you are, whether you're a good person or a bad person, and concerns about that. But there's really not a doubt about who I is. And when I get into talking about the male shell, which is what I want to talk about in this video, that's really what the issue is. I believe I've mentioned in one of the other videos that part of the sense that I have that helped convince me that I really am transgender, that helped bring some certainty, is waking up one morning and realizing there's finally really an I there. And that then raises the issue of, well, I lived this way for almost 66, 67 years. It's almost 60, yeah, almost 66 years. And so, what did I mean by I before I started transitioning? And I started to realize that actually I am a woman named Anita. Well, it's a name I gave myself, but it came from within. It came from within myself, I believe. And so that I actually am a woman named Anita. And so what does that really mean? And so who was the I before? And to answer that, I'm going to talk about the male shell, because the male shell was really the male persona that I used to convince people in the world, convince myself, that I was male, that I was in line with how I looked, and that I wasn't a freak or I was somebody that should be accepted or whatever. But it wasn't authentic. It wasn't really I. Now, I have to say, I mean, this is where you start getting into a lot of confusion here, because the male shell isn't completely other either. It's not something external to me. It certainly is something that I created as a way of dealing with the dysphoria on one hand, to keep it at bay, to keep the internalized transphobia at bay, and still be able to deal with the world and sort of make progress in the world, and still be able to actually live my life without falling either into a depression due to the dysphoria or a depression based on the internalized transphobia. And so, again, it's a part of me, and I have to own it, but it's not me. And so, but it has a lot of me in it. Because it's not just, in one of the other videos, I believe it was one on, the first one on transphobia, which I'll try to link somewhere. I think it ends up being over here, about now. And that I talk about it as being kind of growing out of the dynamic between the internalized transphobia, sort of attacking the internal or the dysphoria that I experienced internally, and that it sort of grew out of that interaction, And I'm not really sure that was the right way to look at it. And again, this is where I've been struggling with this video. I don't mind going back and saying, I don't think I got that right. Because this is a journey of growth. And the way that one grows, frankly, is through a lot of doubt and sort of going back and forth and trying to figure things out and trying some things and making some coming to some initial conclusions, working with those conclusions, finding that they don't quite work, or in some cases they're just perfectly fine, and then you can sort of leave them and keep going. But in this case, I think that analysis was wrong, and I think it was wrong because it didn't really capture the depth and breadth of what the male shell is. And as I've thought about it, I thought, well, there's really nothing new in terms of what I'm going to say about the male shell. Oddly enough, that if you look at the dysphoria as being the id, and you look at the internalized transphobia as being the superego, then the male shell ends up being the ego, and it ends up being sort of classical Freudian psychoanalytical psychology. I don't think that's quite right either. And so I don't have this all worked out. I don't know how long it'll be before I get this all worked out. I may or may not do a part 2 to this. There may be a part 3. There may be a part 4. Who knows? There may be a part 26, frankly. Because this is complicated, and it's not clear, and it's not straightforward. And I'm not sure that I'm ever going to have it exactly right. And I don't know that it's necessary for it to be. It's all trying to come up with an idea or trying to come up with a way of grappling with things so you can make progress. And if you walk away from this video with nothing other than you keep grappling with things, you keep trying things until you feel like you're making some progress, and know that if you keep doing it, you will make progress, then I think that's worthwhile. So, but I think you're starting to understand a little bit about the confusion that a transgender person deals with. I mean, your body and your mind aren't in sync. They're not congruent is the way I look at it. Very mathematical term. I would look at it that way. But it is. It's a very precise term, too. They're not really the same. The body belongs to somebody and the mind belongs to somebody. You happen to be an I that's in here, but one of those two is wrong. And I've always sort of felt, well, you know, being transgender, you really have two options. Because you've got this, you know, the body's going this way, the mind's going this way, and you can either change the body or you can change the mind. And frankly, at this point in our medical science, it's a lot easier to change the body than it is to change the mind. So that's why we are where we are with the medical treatment for transgender people. That it being surgery, that it being drugs, that it being doing things that help make the body more in line with what the brain is doing. But let's get back to the male shell. That's a bit of a tangent. And I was afraid that was going to happen a bit on this, but who cares? But back to the male shell. So the male shell, I think, is this, it's this interface, if you will, between myself, who I actually am, Anita, and the external world, which was experienced as potentially threatening because I didn't appear to be correct in the body that I had. And so there's this awareness of the dysphoria, but I didn't feel it per se. It was just a sense that somehow I knew that if I were to emerge completely as myself and just be myself as I was told I was supposed to be, that people would attack me, people would hate me, people would reject me, And so I created something that would fit their expectations. That's the male persona. But in the process of doing that, the male shell, if you want, or the male facade is the way I talked about it before, and one could talk about it that way. But it's not something that's independent. It becomes completely integrated into my total being. And so who I am as a person gets tied up into this male shell. It's not just simply dealing with the internalized transphobia and the dysphoria, but it's actually dealing with all of my interpersonal relationships. It's dealing with my goals in the world. It's dealing with, it takes over all the functions essentially of my identity. And so a lot of the things I do, playing tennis, for example, there's nothing at all gender specific about playing tennis. And so, but I would look at tennis as being something I did as a man, riding the bicycle, something I did as a man, being an authority figure in my job is something I would associate with being a man. And so all these things would get a sort of a male um, tint to them, I guess would be a good way of putting it. Um, and so as I started first dealing with being transgender, it was easy to talk about the male shell as being something that was wholly other. I wanted to split everything apart, and I wanted to say, well, here I am, and here's this thing I've been hiding behind. And in one of my early affirmations, I talked about hiding behind a male shell or a male facade in order to avoid fear of the feelings of fear and shame. And I wasn't going to do that anymore. Um, that's certainly a valid way of talking about it. It was certainly valid for me at that point in time. But it's not really just hiding behind it. It was fully embracing it, fully becoming it, and using it as a way of sort of scattering the dysphoria. I've talked about this when I talked about the dysphoria. They scattered it around into all sorts of little bits and pieces. It was primarily social dysphoria or some emotional dysphoria. And if I scattered it enough, I didn't really have to deal with the physical side of it. And at the same time, the internalized transphobia, um, I would use that to attack any internal feelings that sort of came up. It actually became the internalized transphobia is not something that's necessarily guarded against, but the male shell would actually take the internalized transphobia and use it as a way of helping regulate the internalized dysphoria, helping tamp it down, helping put the clamps on it, sending me into periods of depression, sending me into periods of being suicidal or socially suicidal, which is the way I tended to do it, just withdraw from everything. But it would do it in such a way that it wouldn't get to a level where I felt compelled to actually do something about it. There ended up being a lot of internal anxiety that also gets generated because the male shell, in terms of scanning the outside world, in terms of all these things I'm getting into, all these things that I'm interested in, it would sort of scan the outside world and say, well, where are the places that are likely to be tripwires for us? Where if I go in and I start doing this, is it likely that I will start experiencing dysphoria and have to, bring in more of the. And so it was really trying to limit the amount of times it brought in the internalized transphobia. But at the same time, it was really doing everything it could to block out these feelings of dysphoria that I had. And I did a really good job with it. I look at the male shell now, and I'm an intelligent person. I'm a resourceful person. I'm a very I know that I can be a very flexible person mentally. That was one of the issues. I want to do another video on am I delusional, in which I want to talk about this aspect a little bit more. Um, but there really was a sense of um, being able to sort of scatter things around, to be able to use the internalized transphobia to sort of scatter the dysphoria, to tamp it down when it started coming out, the anxiety that I felt about getting in and doing things, and at the same time, always looking at what I wanted to do, always looking at what I was going to say, always looking at everything and it was, there's this constant critical assessment of risk, and trying to prevent me from taking too much risk or taking risks in the wrong area. And this is really what led to the anxiety. Ultimately, is what led to my going to therapy back in the 80s. It took a long time to work through. You have all the normal anxiety from growing up and dealing with your parents and dealing with that relationship, dealing with siblings, really sort of as you're growing up trying to understand who you're supposed to be. Those were all issues that were in there too. Those were all Anita's issues. Absolutely. But got and the male shell did a wonderful job of going through that therapy, dealing with those issues where they could be dealt with, and somehow sabotaging very successfully the therapy when it got too close to dealing with the internalized dysphoria, or the dysphoria, or the internalized transphobia, and being transgender, or coming to an awareness of being transgender. And again, it was a little bit easier because it wasn't something that would jump out in the 1980s that it would now. It wouldn't be something that would be asked. It would be something that wouldn't be completely unexpected. And so you're hiding something that nobody's really looking for, and doing a very successful job of hiding something that nobody's looking for, but doing a very good job of making sure nobody ever looks for it as well. And that's really what the male shell was there for. And so I think I'm going to wrap this up right at the moment. But the important part in terms of the understanding of the male shell at this point in time, and again, I think this is going to change as time goes on, is how coupled with me, the male shell actually is. You know, I said before, there's all these things I was interested in, all these things, the math I did, which I saw as being a male activity, was, again, and that was something that was truly me as Anita. I am a woman and I can do mathematics. I actually enjoy mathematics. I actually feel good at mathematics. I find that the intellectual component of it compelling in my own way. I'm not brilliant at it. I always wished I was, but I'm not. I do the religious studies. I do not as a male, but as who I actually am. It's a statement of who I am, and I'm having to go through now, and a lot of the dysphoria that I felt over the last year has come from, when I go out and I play tennis. I mean, they'd be going, oh, I feel so male when I play tennis. Or when I went to church, I would go, oh, I feel so male when I'm teaching Sunday school. And I'm starting to reclaim those parts of who I am from this male persona. They were never male in the first place, but they had that, I was using a maleness component to them, or coating them with this male tint, if you will, in order to help reinforce the sense that who I was congruent with what my body said. And it's not until I all of a sudden realized that the I is not congruent with what the body said, that the real I, the I that I just finally go, oh, I can experience life as a first person, which is really kind of an amazing thing the first time you experience it. That is something that I couldn't experience with the male shell. And so there was always that disconnect, that disassociation, if you will. But I want to stop here. I think I've said the things that I can say right at the moment. There may or may not ever be a second part to the mail shell, but at least now we've sort of covered internalized transphobia. We've talked about dysphoria. This talks about the mail shell. These are sort of the three major components in my own psychological struggle to deal with being transgender. And I'm sort of figuring out in my mind what are the other aspects that I need to talk about. But at least it covers those, and this is really kind of the basics of what drives me as a transgender person. Again, this has gotten long enough. It's probably been rambling enough. I really hope it's made some sort of sense. But do thank you if you've made it this far. I don't know whether to say thank you or say, oh, geez, I really feel sorry. I feel really bad for you. Let me know if it was worthwhile or not. Let me know. Nobody makes any comments, but it'd be nice to get some feedback. If you want to know when I post, which isn't very frequently, unfortunately, there's a lot of other things going on. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you hit the little alarm bell, it'll tell you then that I've posted something, and you can ignore it at that point in time. But thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate the people who watch. I'm glad that somebody, or at least I hope that somebody is finding these useful. So thank you again very, very much.